48-hour art check, round 144.
That's right.
That is right. One of these days, we've got to update this animation.
I agree.
It'd be fun to do kind of another scene. Maybe at like 200 or 250 or something.
Yeah, like I like the idea of maybe I don't know, maybe we can throw in a background, some explosions.
Yeah,
We
that'd
can
be
do it.
cool. The explosion, that was like a placeholder that we never got rid of. I just like sketched that in like 2 seconds. It was like
I
explosion
love
goes
it.
here. So we got Tim and Squatchy and Carissa in the chats. What's up, everybody?
How's it going, guys?
Yeah, thanks for jumping right in. Today's going to be cool. I'm kind of excited about today. So stick around for the topic because it'll be a good one.
Good.
So yeah,
I'll stick around.
yeah, you'll stick around. That's great. I won't be talking to myself like I used to on YouTube. So what have you done in the last little bit?
All right, so I have inked the first three levels of this crazy battle with monsters to get down to the bottom level of water. It'll make more sense when you see the full page.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's the last of the pretend movie pages for those of you following quarterly stories. And then I finished my website. So my website is up and running, which is like a huge weight off my back because I was just full of anxiety throughout the entire process of like approaching it and then doing it. And then I was worried that the DNS settings would be really nightmarish, which it wasn't at all. That ended up being the easiest part of the process because it turns out that in like 10 years, DNS servers are way less complicated than they used to be. You
Yeah.
used to have to like input all this data on like 50 different DNS things to have it all like cover your like kind of hide your URL. And it turns out there's just a button now. So so that pretty much did it. It was like two buttons and it was all set up and ready to go. And then Squarespace has been really incredible. I really love it. I think
Even
I'm
for the webcomic.
well. So there's one thing I don't like that I think will be a game changer. And you know, maybe if somebody watching is like a guru on coding or something who can figure out a fix, let me know. But the one thing I'm a little bummed about was I thought I'd be able to hedge like the blog posts exactly as a webcomic. So you'd post like one blog per page and then have it navigate like a webcomic. Problem is the back, forward, and current navigation buttons would either have to be manually entered each time, which would be a nightmare where you have it link, or coded in. And I'm not that good at coding. And it seems that those navigation buttons are like the big hurdle for most people from what I looked at online. But I did come up with a workaround that I'm pretty happy with. I feel like it's still a huge leg up from the previous site. And it's a lot less vulnerable, which is good because that was one of my main concerns with sticking with WordPress was just the malware vulnerability of it.
Yeah.
Because it's like open source coding. And unfortunately, the downside of that is if somebody doesn't update their plugin, you're pretty much crap out of luck and you have a vulnerable website. So,
Which is
yeah,
why I switched because I
yeah,
got brute force attacked like multiple times in a row over the course of several months, and every time it happened, it cost me 2 days of evenings trying to fix everything.
yeah, same here.
So
And it gets costly too. It gets expensive to have that like
yeah,
protection on your site. So I'm saving a lot of money doing it too.
yeah,
So I'm a big fan. I probably wouldn't have gotten it as quickly if it weren't for the advice of like you and Scott, and so I appreciate that. That helped a lot.
yeah.
Even your little hack that we went over a couple episodes ago, with the showing the playlist for your YouTube
Oh yeah,
playlist on the videos is really cool. So now I can just have 4 videos up and they'll auto upload or auto update every time we update, which is really cool.
Yeah, if you want to see what Scott is talking or what Josh is talking about, you can go to corykerr.com/videos.
Yes.
And you have a similar page, right? Where it's basically
Yeah.
like if you guys are looking at doing Squarespace, and you're doing YouTube, there's this really cool thing where you can post the link to a playlist as an image in a gallery, and it automatically updates it with the newest video. And when you click on one, it turns all the others off and plays that one. And in the middle, if you click on another one, it'll turn that one off. And it's pretty dang slick. So
Yeah.
it's like one of those set it and forget it things. I really liked it. And I kind of just stumbled on it. I haven't seen anybody else doing it.
Yeah.
There probably is, but I haven't come across it. And so it's kind of a slick little, I should do a little tutorial on it or something.
Yeah, it's very cool. Yeah, you can check it out at joshuakemble.com/videos too, which
Yeah.
is kind of neat. So, but yeah, Corey was a huge help. So I definitely recommend the Switch for anybody who doesn't want to deal with like coding or like eternal website maintenance. Um, so yeah, I'm over that hump and I'm pretty excited. So maybe I'll show a little bit during the challenges or something.
Yeah. That'd be cool.
But yeah, yeah,
So I exported the video, and that means I think since let's see, we talked on Wednesday, so I've gotten quite a bit done. The whole video is animated, um, and so you've got like monsters flipping through pages, and you've got the camera moving around. There's a lot of really cool stuff in there. I'm pretty proud of it. So if you want to see that, stay tuned because we will be releasing it to the public on the day that the Kickstarter launches for the 100s. And so if you want to look at there's a Facebook page to kind of get everybody on the same page on the thing. So I won't be releasing any actual motion, but here's kind of a screenshot of how this worked. And then I'm also working on my buddy is a conservationist, works at the LA Zoo, and so I'm donating some work to a charity he runs to save giraffes. So I'm
nice.
working on a logo called Laughs for Giraffes, which is kind of fun because it's like comedians, and then all the money that they raise they donate it to like conservation efforts in Africa. So it's
Cool.
kind of a cool thing. So yeah,
That's
so
awesome. I'll
yeah.
be able to check out the fruits of that because that's like right in my neighborhood. So
Oh yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah. If you want a private kind of tour of the zoo, he owes me, so I'll give him your name.
I do have a son who likes zoos a lot.
Yes, for sure. But yeah, so those are the two main things. I'm a little tired, so I probably don't sound as excited as I am about the video, but it pretty significant accomplishment for me because I was
Yeah.
setting the bar super high. I've never attempted a number of those things that I was able to pull off, and I don't even know that people would notice unless I pointed those things out. But a lot of it was really cool. The crab, there's some crab arms, for example. They're all articulated. There's like 5 points of articulation on each arm, and if you don't animate, this won't make any sense. But instead of animating each point of articulation, what I did is I put keyframes on one point of articulation, and then I used an expression and pick whipped that variable and turned it into an equation where everything else would move with that one set of keyframes without me having to animate all of it. And so
Oh wow.
basically, like 9 different things were animating off of this one thing, but at different speeds because I would multiply it or divide it by variables that would change. And so all I did is go in and move this one thing, and everything else would move, and it would seem to be different each time because of some kind of random number generator stuff that I kind of plugged into this variable. And it wasn't like I found code online, like I kind of logicked it out myself. So I was kind of proud of that. There's like hundreds of little tiny things like that in it that I'm pretty excited about.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, even things as simple as the way that the pages just kind of fall the second the hand is done, like the timing in that is really impressive, and I can't wait to kind of show it off. So,
Yeah,
yeah, really cool work on that, and I'm sure everybody in the hundreds is like super appreciative of it because it's really professional looking.
thanks.
It looks really good and really on theme, and I think will make everybody really amped about sharing it around too. So,
Yeah,
but yeah, really excellent work on that.
thanks. There's two major flaws that I'm not going to point out to anybody, but you can see them if you look for them.
I, I think I might have noticed one, but we'll talk
Yeah.
after.
Okay. But there's a difference between what I would normally charge for something like this and donating my time, and that difference is I'm not fixing those things.
Exactly.
So, yeah. How about challenges?
Yeah, so challenges have been like really this website here. Let me pull it up just so you guys can kind of see. But the website was a massive challenge. I didn't expect it to be quite as much of a challenge as it is, and it just was. So I don't know if you guys can see this, but
Yeah,
so
you can
there's
see
the
it.
videos page we were just talking about where you can have your playlist and stuff pulled up. Um, it's uh, it's just been a beast to kind of set this thing up. So if I go to like portfolio illustrations, it's going to show off all the illustrations. Um, if I go to comics, all of the different comics that I've made throughout the years, including one of the ones I've talked about multiple times, the graphic novel that I finished. That's like 128 pages, and just tagging and SEOing everything, um, which is just basically like inputting data for search engines. Took forever,
And
but
you're
I'm
you're
happy with
putting
the
me to
result.
shame with that, man. I mean, that is a massive amount of not just web optimizing the images, which is where everybody usually stops, myself included, but doing the SEO for each individual image and all the metadata is a ridiculous amount of work. It's like
Yeah, and
so impressive.
I tried, I have more to do. But I mean, like you can even see like a comic I used to do for like Washington Post, like with this guy Lawrence Ross, like used to write it. It was a
Hmm.
political comic. Um, but there's a whole bunch of stuff on here, and then my main hub for quarterly stories is now linked to this site. So now if you type in quarterlystories.com, it's going to take you to this page, and it has a nice little video introduction. Now that I know a little more about After Effects, I might have to revisit doing that video introduction because I can edit it a lot better now. And I'm thinking there might be some really cool things with just cutout backgrounds that could be used where, they just kind of phase back from the main figure.
Yeah.
But that's a whole world of work I'm not quite ready to bite off.
See, what you don't realize yet is that the 48-hour art check is my secret plan to slowly ease you into not realizing that you've become my animation collaborator.
Well, I'm kind of excited about that as a possibility
Yeah.
for maybe a midpoint project, especially when I'm done with this book and through the kickstarting and stuff. So yeah, anyhow, I'm gonna turn this screen share off. But yeah, that was a massive undertaking. Although I feel like compared to like what you undertook with the animation, I don't feel like it was quite equivalent. That animation looks like a ton of work. But what I'm excited about is now that I'm up and running on this, it opens a lot of options. And like it's also, you know, a nice reminder to actually kind of blog a little more often. So I think I'll be
Right.
trying to do at least a weekly blog post, just to kind of just to kind of stay in the practice of writing, because there is something about writing and reading that's a lot different than just talking to a screen. And I think that'll be advantageous too, as well as for just like the SEO of the site. So yeah, so anyhow, so there's that, and just balancing that, the like 3 hours of sleep a night I was getting working on it, and then family. That was the big challenge. But like there is a good feeling about kind of being on the other end of the challenge. And so like I'm sure you'll have a lot of similar things to say, but yeah, I mean, just overcoming that big hurdle, like, and then also remembering that I can, is a really nice thing. Because like I said, there was all this trepidation. I can't believe I was so worried about transferring over the domains. And once I did it, I was like, oh, that's what, like, because I remember asking Scott and then asking you about it. And both of you guys were like, I don't really remember. I mean, it wasn't that big a deal, you know? And
Right.
I was like, but it is, because I was remembering like about 10 years ago having to do that.
Yeah,
And like,
it used to be way worse.
yeah,
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 it's
where
not a
you
big deal
talk to
now.
like some IT guy and they'd be like, enter in this weird code of numbers, and you're like, but why? Like, why isn't it simple? And it's turns out like 10 years does a lot in
Yeah.
digital timelines. So anyhow, things are looking good, and like and just overcoming that hurdle and taking on an obstacle like that, it helps to have a win, you know. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, for sure.
yeah.
Before I do my challenges, I want to be clear about what I'm talking about. I'm talking about these challenges because this is a segment on the show, though I'm concerned that it's going to come off as complaining. So I just want to be really clear. Like, I'm excited that I did this video, and I had many opportunities to do a much simpler version than what I produced, but I set out to make something at this level, and so in no way am I like begrudging it or feel like I'm being taken advantage of or whatever. So I just want to say that, just because I know a lot of people that are watching might feel bad hearing what I'm about to say, but just know that this is just part of, it's just part of animation, and that's just par for the course. And so it's not different. It is just one of the challenges that I dealt with over the last little bit. So having said that, I'm excited about the video and I'm glad that I did it, and I would do it again the same way if I had the opportunity to do it again. The challenges are many. I've got a pretty screaming computer. Over the years I've built it up. I've got 32 gigs of RAM. Last night at 1:30 in the morning, I set it to render for the ninth time. It had failed 8 times prior to that, for any number of reasons that involve clearing out databases and emptying caches and cleaning up scratch disks and allocating virtual memory and actual memory and GPU memory, and trying to figure out what's going on and all of this stuff. And each one of those times that it fails, your computer's tied up and you can't do anything with it, and so you have to like wait. Anyway, it finally rendered, and it took 11 hours to render. And so I started it last night at about 2 in the morning after figuring out what I think was the problem, which turned out to be at least one of the 6 variables that I think I've honed in on that caused it to be problematic. And then on top of that, I kind of took it on by myself because everyone who is working in the anthology right now is super busy, right? And we've got people
Yeah.
that are editing, people that are figuring out pricing for things, people that are making different things and drawing different things for different tiers, and then everybody's working on their side projects as well. And so I kind of was like, hey, I could use some help, and I got a little bit, but it was a little bit. So I also, on top of doing all of that, I also like illustrated almost every asset that's in there, plus masked everything, and there's upwards of about 40 layers spread out in Z space. And then on top of that, I got this really cool effect going where I made the video, which is playing on an old, if you can see it here, it's playing on an old like TV. Each one of those pieces moves randomly, again, like with the wiggle expression It's kind of this random number generator, and I have them linked to each other and stuff. But I got this really cool effect that caused the well, I'll show you. It caused the TV to have kind of a V-Sync issue, like you did in old tube TVs, old CRT TVs. That was linked to the dials and would be fixed and broken by the dials spinning back and forth as the video played. And unfortunately, it was just too much for my computer to handle, and that was the straw that broke the camel's back. So um, I had to kind of destroy about 4 hours worth of work to get it to render, and I still don't know why it won't do that. Maybe my video card isn't up to snuff or whatever. But anyway, it was pretty frustrating, and one of the most challenging things was just like an emotional thing, and this is like being vulnerable saying this because I'm a professional. I'm supposed to be tough or whatever. Like I rendered it and I showed my wife, who's very honest, and she was like, "Yeah, that sucks." So the framing of it was weird, and I was so excited about certain parts of it that I was hanging on those parts more than moving the virtual camera to where it needed to be.
Yeah.
And so after doing all of everything I just said the night before, I had to do it all again
Uh,
after I went in and redid the camera, and it is so much better. But like I was like broken, like you work super hard on something and then like you're crestfallen because you know that the critique is right.
yeah.
And so I had to redo all the camera work, and I made the camera a little bit more complicated this time as well. So instead of just doing like a normal After Effects camera, this camera had a shallow depth of field and roving focal length to mimic like an actual camera. And so as it moves around the room, I went in and keyframed the focal length shifting back and forth as if it was trying to autofocus on a lit subject. And so I don't know that anyone will notice any of that, but I do know that it adds a little bit of realism to everything as it's doing that. So anyway, all of that was really challenging, but
Yeah.
super excited that it's done, and I feel great about it. And I just have a few audio tweaks to make and stuff at the end of it, and it's awesome. And I set out. I mean, about a month ago, I decided when I finished the thing that I was working on that I really wanted to spend some time making a really solid animation piece. And
Yeah.
so I saw this as an opportunity to do that. And there's a lot of things that are not great about it, but at the same time, it's at the quality that I would want it to be to show in my portfolio. And so I'm
Yeah.
excited about that.
Yeah, and I think there's some huge hurdles you overcame on it, and it's interesting that you mentioned the outer critique because it it also helps for those of us who like I have to critique my staff every once in a while on projects they've bent over backwards on and like just are not working, and it helps and is always good to kind of have those moments ourselves
Yeah.
because like you have a student who's pulled like 4 all-nighters and what they made is just not working.
Yeah.
It helps you like get in touch with what they're feeling because honestly that feeling never it never actually gets easy. You always want to just have it be knocked out of the park, but that's cool that you kind of hit it running and revised it, stuck it through, and ended up with a better product for it.
Yeah.
And that what's interesting is like for anybody who hasn't delved into animation, rendering is probably the worst part of the entire process.
Is
If there could be a better way to render on the preview, if there could just be a better way to render more quickly,
yeah.
it makes you realize why like Pixar has like a whole room full of just hard drives processing.
Oh yeah, just supercomputers, and you just send it to the render farm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't have a render farm. I have the only computer that I own is dedicated to it, so I can't do anything else when it's doing it. Yeah. So okay, let's knock plans out real fast because I'm excited about getting to this
Yeah.
topic. So what are your plans for the next 48 hours?
So my plans at this point are to so I have some kind of branding stuff I got to work on. And then aside from that, I have two more levels of this beast to go. So I'm hoping to, by the next time we have this, at least have one of those levels, but it'd be nice to have like one and a half done. There's a lot of little characters in it that it's fun to draw because it's like super doodly, but it's really time consuming to do this um like no negative space, just fill the page with characters. Makes me really appreciate the guy who did Where's Waldo illustrations.
Oh my gosh.
Um, and a lot of people it's weird. I'm forgetting the guy's name, but a lot of people don't realize like that guy started out as like an illustrator for like the New Yorker and like for magazines where he'd do these crowd scenes that looked exactly like Where's Waldo pages for like for your magazine, and it's just an insanely fun thing to do, but it's super taxing and time consuming to do that kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
yeah. Oh, we have a couple comments in the chats. Mike said that you were triggering him already, and, and then Carissa said triggering. Mike also said, yeah, Corey was stuck in rendering hell for the whole weekend. Scott joined us in the chats, and then I think that was Tim just said like yeah, rendering sucks. So
Yeah, and Victor and Matthew have also jumped in as well since we said hi to the to
yeah.
most everybody else. So
Hello.
yeah, yeah. So for my plans, not super tough. I'm gonna finish that logo, and then clean up the. I'm gonna add some audio. So like there's some projectors, like old school reel to reel stuff going on in the background. And so I'm gonna get like kind of the hum of like a CRT TV like turning on and turning off like that, and get some of that
Ooh,
going, and then get some like kind of kind of old projector sounds, and then I want to get, and I think I'm gonna have to make this myself, so I'll do some Foley, but I want to have like squishy wet sounds when the octopus is like looking through the pages. So I'm gonna squeeze watermelon next to the mic, in time with the just get that kind of squishy stuff. So anyway, I'm gonna do a lot of like playing, just for fun to really like kind of put it over the top. Because I don't know if you haven't done animation, watch animation watch it and then watch it again with the sound off. The sound really sells a ton of the movement. Like
yeah, I mean,
if you mute good animations, you're like, oh man, I can see the strings on that puppet.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. And what's interesting is also the sound is so important that even before it was sound, like people would play piano and stuff along with it just to kind of create this notion of movement. Because yeah, it is weird to watch a muted cartoon.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah. It's super weird. Victor's asking when the anthology is expected to go live on Kickstarter. Soon. I can't remember exactly, but within the next 2 weeks, I think is what we were thinking.
yeah,
Mike is the editor, and we'll answer that question in the chats soon. While we're waiting on Mike's answer, and before we jump into the conversation, we're going to be talking about perseverance and what a lot of neurologists and sociologists and psychologists are calling grit, which is kind of a group of personality traits. I would like to ask everybody in the chat, because I want to include this in the episode for the podcast. What are some ways that you guys persevere through things that are worth it and difficult? That's something that, because I I just went to a big lecture and I'll talk about that. But what are ways that you kind of get through? Because like every project, everything that's worth it, there are many times, and sometimes they are long periods of time where it's not fun and it's not entertaining, and there's kind of those peaks, those little moments that are kind of like spikes. So my question is, what do you guys do in between peaks, to like keep going? Because I think that'll super help. And Mike is saying June 1st is the plan. We'll announce it officially as soon as we're 100% sure. Have everything approved and ready to launch. So All right. Ready to do the episode?
Yeah, let's jump in. I love
Okay.
it.
Today's topic is perseverance and grit, or in other words, how to develop the personality traits that will keep you motivated when you don't feel like it. So I work at a university, and it's a university that is a teaching university, not a research university, and they have kind of a hyper focus on teaching, and so like it's this revolutionary idea that like students are important at school, and instead of like my ego or whatever else, and so every year they get like world renowned researchers on education and learning and thinking, and we have like these little symposiums, these little conferences, these little breakout sessions. And there was a guy who came, and he's worked with Carol Dweck, and he's worked with many of those people who are in and about kind of that perseverance and grit space. And he had done a number of studies. And now that I'm talking about him, I can't remember his name. But anyway, I will come back. I will leave it in the show notes if it doesn't come to me. But he personally had run a bunch of these studies that a lot of these books are based on, and it was just fascinating because there is the assumption out there, which is an incorrect assumption. The science and the research proves that this is not true, and I think most of us that do difficult things by choice know that this isn't true. But the idea is that the pervading myth is that there are some people that are just motivated and other people that are not. There are some people that are just talented and there are other people that aren't. And the fact of the matter is that whereas some people, everyone starts at different levels of things, and so you could say that that's talent. The reality of the situation is that what most people say is talent is actually perseverance, is somebody who is willing to stick through the tough times and do the hard things to get to that point. And so I thought it might be interesting to just kind of go through my notes because I find this type of stuff like super fascinating
Yeah.
in my occupation, like how it applies to how I might teach, how I might encourage and motivate students. But I don't want to say more so, but equally so, on my YouTube channel and my presence online, how I might explain some of the things that I might have happened into or accidentally kind of triggered in myself. Because a lot of people would look at me and Josh and other people in this community and say, like, well, you guys are just like, your output is ridiculous. Um, and I think while that seems true, it's not magic. It's also not an innate ability. And I wasn't born like this. I am naturally very lazy. Um, and so getting to this point has been a series of activities. And the idea is that the research is backing up now that if you are not motivated to
Yeah.
start and work and finish things, you can actually do a series of things to gain that as a personality trait.
Huh. This is
So
interesting.
yeah, it is kind of interesting. And before we've started this episode, we asked some people in the chat what they think. So I'm gonna read a couple of these. Um, Carissa Hammond says, "I don't know. I think I try until I break, and then I cry, complain, sleep, and try again." And I can relate to that because until I got into some good habitual productivity, I was kind of that kind of neuron type thing where it's an all or nothing. It's like pedal to the metal until you burn out the engine and then you have to replace the engine. Like I did that a lot. White Walls Underneath says, I go back to sketches and look at other people's work. I also remind myself that, quote, this is going to be awesome, even if things are not looking good, which is
Huh.
interesting because that is one of the three major keys that this guy pointed out that the research shows. So we'll talk about that in a minute. Tim says, if I can try and step away for 5 minutes or so and then come back fresh with a little more focus so that he's kind of intermittently timing himself so he's not burning out, which is interesting as well.
Yeah.
So Josh, I'm curious, what do you do to maintain productivity?
Huh. That's a very long question, so, or a very long answer to a very short question, but I'll try to make it brief. Um, I used to just go in spurts of just, all nighters and do like, three all nighters in a row and go overboard on projects and quickly found that wasn't sustainable. And since then, I've had just this kind of idea of doing things a little bit at a time, just kind of carving away with a really solid back planned goal. And so to me, like the main thing is knowing, having a very clear objective that's somewhat flexible, that allows for like, things to come up that inevitably will, to maybe even reroute course if need be. But at least I need a destination. And once I have a clear idea of a destination, I just kind of carve away at it, allot the time, budget the time that I have to put into it, and then just try the entire time uh, not to kind of overfill my capacity, but just get at the point where, if I think of like what I'm doing is like a cup, it's like I'm basically filling it with water all the way to the edge. And I want to ride that edge, because if I'm not going to be pushing myself to my highest capabilities. But if I push a little too hard, it risks massive burnout. And
Right.
so it's weird, because it's like a lower stakes game because it's measured and balanced out, but it's a much higher stakes game because I'm riding so close to that line that that burnout somewhat sometimes seems very inevitable, because of the fact that it's so close to that. But it's this thing that I've kind of developed, and most of it's through habits. And so it's really just forcing myself to get into positive habits that get me closer to my goals, and that's really what's gotten me closer to my goals. And I can say, just on a professional level too, um, when you're working at like the executive level, usually things do not happen quickly. And so there are lots of things that happen quickly, but if you focus too much on the things that happen quickly, you'll find yourself in a situation where there's no change, there's no positive growth, there's no difference in approach. And so like you'll find yourself either burning out or just phoning it in, and doing kind of a mediocre job. So professionally, I use that same exact tactic, to try to kind of back plan big objectives. And I'm talking like 3 years down the road type objectives, like 4 years down the road type objectives. And that's one of those things you really, I'm excited to get into this, because I think it's a really important skill that you have to develop, especially as you move your way up. Like, I don't think any art director could last longer than maybe a year, without the ability to carve away in very microscopic points and get these little tiny wins, for like bigger company objectives. Um, but what's cool is when you can keep that objective like clearly in focus, when you get there, it's like it's sort of unbelievable, especially if it's like a 2 year goal, 3 year goal, where
Yeah.
you're seeing like this complete thing happen that you've been planning for like 3 years, and there have been times where it seems unachievable and stuff. So I hope that kind of makes sense. But that's the main thing that keeps me encouraged, is just having done it before.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I would say is my big resting point, is like, well, I've carved away at these little things and it's accomplished bigger things before. So why would this be any different? I
Yeah.
don't know.
And the really interesting thing about that is, um, that there's two types of answers that you get with this, and I think they're both very helpful. One, is universally applicable, and the other is individually applicable. And the first part of your answer is very good advice and very helpful, but those are a series of things that work for you,
Yeah.
and other people that apply them, their results are going to vary. The other part of what you said is universally applicable and challenging because you said a series of practices, right? And there's different tricks and different things that you're doing to make that work. And then at the end, you said you maintain perseverance because you've achieved hard things before and you know that you can do it again. And so here's an interesting model. This is the worst way to show this on video, and it won't work on a podcast. But here's part of my notes. If you combine trust, growth, and purpose, those are the three components that will give you grit and perseverance. If you take grit and perseverance and you couple that with daily deliberate practice, that is a guarantee to increasing your stronger skills, which will lead to success. And when you have success, then you know that this process works and it's no longer a struggle. And so once you have that first success, it's really interesting. And so there's a couple things about this that I thought was really fascinating. And I'll show you this. And anybody who's listened to anything I've ever said will know that I perked up a lot when I saw this. He started his talk talking about the difference in the future is not going to be the talented and the untalented. It's going to be the learners versus the non-learners. And he said, robots are coming for all of our jobs. And I was immediately like, I like this guy. Right? And so, but he started by saying, they've done a survey of truck drivers, and truck drivers in the United States of America, that is the largest occupation of adult men. And they surveyed them. The average answer to this question was 40 years. And the question was, when do you think robots are going to take your job? When do you think automation and self-driving cars will take over your position? And they said, no sooner than 40 years from now. They asked the people in Silicon Valley who are actually doing that, and they say 18 months to 3 years, depending on legislation. And so there's a huge disconnect between the belief of a huge segment of our society and the belief of somebody of those that are building their replacements.
Yeah.
And the argument about that is super interesting, but he uses that as a way to say each of you, whoever is listening to this, people in general, need to switch on the idea of learning for the rest of your life, because automation is not a problem for a learner, because you just learn, right? You just adapt and you learn, right? But automation is a huge problem for a fixed mindset. And that was the kind of Carol Dweck side of things, who's his partner, the fixed mindset versus the growth mindset, which is a fixed mindset is you are things, and a growth mindset is you can become whatever you want. And the idea is that you have a fixed amount of traits that you can't control, or you have malleable plastic traits that you can manipulate and grow. The idea for somebody who has a fixed mindset of robots coming and taking your job is terrifying. The idea for a growth mindset is, oh, good, that will free me up to do more interesting things. And so he asked what your learning plan is. And I thought that was really interesting that he was talking about a lot of people get an education, right? Hugh Nibley is a scholar that was talking about getting an education as if education is something that is fixed that you can achieve at some point, right? But like we use that term incorrectly. And so anyway, he talks about this, and he talks about the first thing is trust, feedback. You have to believe that the people that are helping you, the people that are giving you that feedback, have your best interest at heart. And this kind of reminds me of yesterday, where I was super excited that this thing finally rendered and that I was done with it. And I showed my wife, and she told me that it sucked. And I trust that she has my best interest at heart, and that she wasn't saying that to be mean or be vindictive or to hurt my feelings,
Yeah.
but because it was the best thing for the project. Otherwise, I would have just shut down and put up my defenses and, said, well, screw you. I'm taking my video and going home, or whatever. And so there has to be that kind of that level of trust. And this is why on Twitter and YouTube and everywhere else and Instagram and whatever else, The drive-by critiques are completely pointless,
Yeah.
totally mean and useless. Because some rando on the internet that tells me he hates my work, I don't trust you. I don't care what you think. And in fact, the fact that you have bothered to say something negative to someone you don't know tells me what I need to know about how to feel about your critiques. But if I were to say something and Josh or Scott or Mike or somebody were to say, hey, maybe try doing this, or you could kind of tweak this type of thing, there's a level of trust there where I would take that into consideration because
Yeah.
that's not coming from just rando person on the internet.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. And trust is so important too. I don't know if this will tie in maybe later, but it seems like with the end objective, because one thing I think is really consistent is like the idea of a vision. So like if you're if you're working on something with no vision like of what that endpoint is, and like you have no idea what the place over the rainbow is, it's like it's a long journey and you can get lost and really disheartened very quickly. But if you have an idea of the vision, um, that you're heading towards, and not just that, but you actually have trust involved in that, with the endpoint of whatever project it is, it's a much better scenario. So like I would say that for like especially leading teams and classrooms, of students and stuff like that, it's like trust is so important just for that process, because people have to actually be able to trust that end goal. If you don't trust the end goal, then you're going to doubt yourself the entire way. And once again, that grit part, which, by the way, we've been saying grit so much, it just makes me want to say "kiss my grits" because that's just a grit thing. Um, but sorry, there's an old TV show called Alice, um, where that was her catchphrase. But anyhow, yeah, like to keep grit, to kind of maintain grit, it's like you have to actually believe in that end goal, and to believe in the end goal, you really have to trust, and that's a hard thing. It's an easy thing lost and a hard thing gained, you know.
Yeah.
So
And trust is kind of the underpinnings of the other two. One of which is purpose, and so it's interesting that you bring that up because it's very true. Without trust, the other two don't matter. They don't work. And he said some interesting things. Feedback plus stating the expectation of success, meaning feedback plus the idea that you believe that this person can achieve it, is super important. And they did studies. They did double blind studies where they took one of the biggest problems that teachers have is that they give feedback and that feedback isn't implemented. And so then the teachers get frustrated because they're wasting their time, and the students get frustrated because it's like, well, why is this guy just being mean to me? I worked really hard on that paper, or whatever, and then he just tells me, what's wrong with it. And so what he said is the message received is more important than the message intended. And the idea is that if you communicate the possibility of success and the reason that you're giving feedback, those two things can be the difference in what you intend and the misinterpretation of what's received. The study that they did was they took a note and they put a note in a little post-it note, handwritten post-it note in every report, sealed manila envelope. That's what made it double blind. And what they found was one note said, the reason I'm giving you this feedback is that I believe that you're a good writer and that you can do really, really well. Otherwise, I wouldn't waste my time. The other note said, the following feedback are things that you can improve on, which is obvious, right? And so basically, the second note didn't say anything. And what they found is that in the control group that got the kind of non-message note, there was a 40% response rate of people that applied the feedback to their paper. In
huh.
the statement where it said, I stated a belief and it stated a reason. I believe that you can do this. This is why I am giving you feedback, so that you can achieve this thing. Um, there was an 80% response rate. And so, literally, just stating purpose and the belief that that person can achieve that purpose doubled the response, which is super interesting, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that makes sense, like psychologically. I think from most of our experience as artists, I know Corey, I know you can probably agree with this too, but it's like my own experience has been that you know, it literally having like one or two friends who really believed in me, um, really is probably why I ended up being in art.
Yeah.
Because there are times where it gets dark when you're trying to kind of take on this like tilt at this windmill, you know,
Yeah.
and 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 you know it ebbs and flows. But you know the creative life is not the easiest path, and it's definitely a hard a hard thing to achieve, and it can at times seem impossible. So having that person who kind of roots you on and really believes in you and really believes that you can get there really makes all the difference. And I think you know, juxtaposing that, I think we've all had experiences with people who literally expect us to fail, and it's interesting though thinking about my own experience. Sometimes those people can be a when I was more negatively motivated, could also be a motivation on its own just to kind of prove those people wrong.
Yeah.
But I do think the other form of motivation to like live up to expectations, live up to belief, like is much more motivating and positive as a result. Whereas I feel like the disproving the haters kind of thing, it can be fuel, but it's fuel that burns pretty hot.
Yeah. Hot and fast and runs out.
Exactly.
And I would say, from my own personal experience, that a lack of people who believed in me is why I was well into my 30s before I started becoming an
Yeah.
artist. Because I never had anything like that. I had the opposite. I had people, that I respected tell me that, I couldn't do it, or that it was, and I unfortunately believed them and wasted decades of my life not doing the thing that I love doing. So that's one. Here's the other thing. The next one, the second one. So the first one's trust, right? And as part of trust, a belief that you can achieve it, coupled with the idea and support that you have with other people behind you. The next one is to emphasize growth. And he talked about the idea that, and this is interesting because this also aligns with Daniel Pink's research, where mastery is one of the major motivating factors in our psychology, is that you're able to continue to grow and master something. That's why things that you're able to achieve, and then there's not a level above that, you do that and give up, because there's no reason to continue to do something that you've mastered. But continual purposeful mastery is super motivating when you can, and that's why art and music and things like that are really fascinating and somewhat addictive, is because there's no end goal. There's just continually leveling up and getting better than you were before. There's a constant mastery. And he said, if you can rewire your brain to think of the struggle and the frustration and the all the times when you just want to just go outside and just scream at the clouds, as the same thing as lifting weights, that neurologically you're on track. Society has programmed us to think that struggle, stress, and resistance equals something that you should stop doing. And he gave the example, and my buddy has a PhD in math and is a super smart guy, and he was sitting at this table with me, and it was funny because every time he would say this, I felt like it took on a greater meaning because I was in the presence of a mathematician, because he would say things that I have said about myself, like, "You're not a math person." I've
Yeah.
said I'm not a math person. I literally have said that hundreds of times in my life. And the fact
Yeah.
of the matter is that in that aspect of my life, I took resistance and frustration as a sign that I should not do that thing, rather than as a sign of struggle and resistance. And if we do this with our muscles, it makes perfect sense. The heavier the weights that I lift, the more frequently that I do that, the stronger my muscles are. Your brain is exactly the same way. There's a number of studies that I can get into if we want, that he quoted, where it just basically proves that you get more benefit neurologically out of struggling with something than you do out of doing something that you enjoy.
Yeah, agreed.
And
And what's
so, go ahead.
what's interesting, just tying that into our experience with art, it's like, you know, I don't think I've had anything beneficial happen to me in art that wasn't a struggle.
Yeah.
So like it's a fascinating thing, but it is hard to remember in the moment. And once again, that's where I think experience helps too, because you struggle through something and you see this great reward, um, and it encourages you like the next time to kind of make that struggle again.
Mm-hmm.
Mike in the chats also mentioned that he said, I'm guilty of running on negative motivation quite a bit. I get told my ideas are too ambitious or complicated a lot, and that just immediately triggers a whatever, I'm going to effing do it anyway response. And he said, I've mellowed out a bit though, working on it. And actually, I relate to that a lot. I remember the first time I applied for the Zarek grant that I ended up getting, actually, and this was when that was like a really big deal. Um, I had one of my closest friends at the time, who's no longer a friend, who just would doubt like anything I would try to do in art, tell me, well, that's stupid. You're not going to get that grant. And
Right.
I got the grant, and I very shortly after that kind of severed that friendship, because it was just not helpful to have somebody doubting me all the time alongside me while I was trying to be on this journey of like bettering myself and getting myself out there. So I relate to that 100%, Mike.
Yeah.
And it is like we said, it's a fuel. It is a fuel. It's not the best fuel though.
And
Um,
Carissa makes an interesting comment. She says, "I tend to believe the critics and collapse," and I think that's a natural response.
yeah,
You know, and he actually went into several ways that you can get past that and get over that. They did a study where they have this idea of fixed mindset, growth mindset. We've had Scott on and we've talked about this, but the gist of it is, if you believe that your traits are fixed, and that you can't do anything about them, you have a fixed mindset. If you believe that your traits are malleable and that you can increase skills, abilities, and thinking, as you choose and work, then you have a growth mindset, right? So it's being something or having things cause, it's you acting or being acted upon. It's one of those two, right? So
yeah,
they did this little survey of a group of people, and they basically categorized them as fixed mindset or growth mindset. Then they gave them challenges, and the challenge was intended. Um, the researchers knew that they would fail at this challenge. I can't remember what it was, but it was some thinking task that was, that they knew that they would fail at multiple times. And into the test, what they did is they programmed a delay. You could make progress, and then when you failed, there would be a delay while the system quote unquote reset. And during that time, they were measuring blood flow and brain waves in their brain. And what happened is the fixed mindset people, their brain shut off. They basically spiraled. Each time that they failed, they would stop thinking, and they would just wait. Whereas the growth mindset people, each time that they failed, their brain would ramp up even more than when they were doing the challenge. And
yeah,
then they asked everybody what they were thinking. What happened is, those that saw that failure as an iteration, and they said, okay, so I got this far, and now I know that this stuff works, and I know that that doesn't work, so I'm ready to do this again. What am I going to do next time? They started planning their plan of attack. Whereas those that failed and just got disappointed in themselves and were like, I guess I got to do this again. They never really got anywhere. But the ones that took it as a challenge, did that. And so the growth mindset, fixed mindset, is one way to do that. Another way to do that is he literally says if you can get one success of something really hard, and then you reflect on that after the fact. It has to be those two things. And I want to talk about this after we get into kind of purpose, but it kind of fits here. So just know that I'll talk about purpose in a minute. They did this 2 by 2. So it's a double blind study within a double blind study. What that means is that it's layered, right? And so they took an area of the U.S. where the schools were good. There was enough money. The teachers were being paid well, but the students were underperforming the expectation, right? And so a lot of people were blaming it on socioeconomic things, and some people were saying cultural and whatever. And they said, well, I wonder if we can use this research to get these students who are statistically going to drop out of high school and drop out of college, or not go to college in the first place. If we can get them to gain perseverance that they don't have because their environment doesn't have it. And so in 8th grade, right before, as they're leaving middle school and right before they go to high school, they had all their 8th grade teachers assess them, right? Basically sort them out for fixed and growth mindset, or sort them out for grit and perseverance, right? Who sticks to a task even if it's frustrating, questions like that. And then they had their 9th grade teachers after the study also do the same thing. So that's the first blind. That's the control and the result. So that'll show you the delta. Then they took these students and they put them in something called Camp Champions, which is a summer camp that was specifically intended to make them do really hard things that they think that they couldn't do, but were set up so that they could actually achieve them, right? And so some of them learned to swim for the first time. Some of them took on rock climbing. Some of them learned, very difficult skills, a lot of physically demanding things. And what they did is, there were 2 groups. There were those that were tutored and helped, specifically so that it kind of guaranteed their success, but it didn't feel like that it was rigged. And then the other group that it didn't guarantee their success, and they kind of were left onto their own devices. Then at the end of that, they kind of got the stats, right? And so those that had like the mentorship far exceeded everybody else. Then they waited a certain period of time. And at the end of that period of time, they were asked to just take 15 minutes and reflect on this question. How did Camp Champions, or how do you think your experience at Camp Champions can relate to your future? Just 15 minutes, write a paragraph about that. And they read a bunch of the responses and things. And it was basically an opportunity for these students to abstractly think about, well, it was hard and I didn't know how to do it, but I kept doing it. And then I eventually was able to do it. And so I think I could probably do that in anything now.
Yeah.
And what they found was it takes the combination of those two things, which is super fascinating. It's not that people achieve hard things and then all of a sudden they have perseverance. It's that if somebody trusts them, if somebody gives them a purpose, if somebody communicates the possibility of success and then helps them succeed in something that feels exceptionally difficult, and then after the fact, distanced enough so that it doesn't feel like the same event. So you can't say, well, that was camp time, and camp is different. It has to be different, but also close enough to where you can still remember what it feels like in your gut. You articulate and connect what was previously disconnected, which is the future and the past. Then perseverance and grit shoot through the roof. And there was like the numbers were crazy of people going to college and graduating that had no right to graduate based on their socioeconomic background, based on their history, based on the statistics, U.S. and based on the statistics within that particular area. And it all came down to the combination of reflecting on something super challenging that you achieved. And what that does is Because then we started asking him all these questions. We said, well, I asked him, I said, how much time does it have to have between that? And he said, there's not any clear data, but the hypothesis right now that we're working with is that you need it to be not so long that you forget what it feels like, but not so soon that it feels like the same event. It's going to be a different event, but you still remember what it feels like. And then other people asked, like, does this one event work? And he said basically the one event works with the reflection, because once you do that, it changes who you are. And then you do it again, and you do it again, and you do it again. And if that domino effect starts to happen, the rest of the course of your life is based on the knowledge, not the understanding, but the knowledge in your gut that if I set out to do hard things, I can do them. I know that for a fact because I reflected on the fact that I've already done that. And so that
Yeah.
earlier success of something that's super challenging now feels different. Whereas before I really got into this, frustration equaled I'm not a math person. Now, frustration equals this is just part of the process of animation. This is just what illustration is like. I know that frustration is part of doing important and difficult things because I've rewired the way that I thought about stuff. In my 30s, I've done that. And
Yeah.
so you can teach an old dog new tricks.
Yeah. I think that's remarkable, and that does it's weird, but maybe it's my confirmation bias or something. But but hearing it is kind of true to my experience. I've found that that in general, like uh yeah, I mean, like the overcoming of things, and also celebrating or looking back on successes, I think is really underrated.
Yeah.
Like I think that like one of the things I try to do with my art team, or like when I used to teach with my students, or in my own life, like with, let's say I land a big client I've always wanted to land, or I finish like a massive job like my website, like I try to celebrate a little bit. I try to
Yeah.
get pumped about it. And the cynic, which is really deep within me, I do have a big cynic just in myself. If you doubt it, like just read my webcomic, you know. But but that cynic just wants to be like, don't get excited about this thing because you'll just get let down.
Right.
And because there's a vulnerability, and Cory and I have talked about that ad nauseum. But vulnerability, there's a massive level of vulnerability it takes to actually get pumped about something, like to get really excited about something. I'll bring up like the Hundreds anthology. I'm excited about that coming out.
Yeah.
What's the risk there by saying that publicly? Well, if it doesn't get funded, then I'm going to look like a moron for being excited about it, and everybody involved in it who's put in all this work. You know what I mean? But it will get funded, by the way. But anyhow, my point is there's still a risk to being pumped. Whereas to be a cynic, there's not a lot of risk because you're always going to be proven right. And if you're wrong, well, then you had something good happen unexpectedly. So there's no disappointment.
Yeah.
But I do think allowing yourself to be vulnerable enough to be excited about an opportunity, which might mean being let down when that opportunity doesn't happen. But I think that just celebrating successes, kind of re-looking at big accomplishments, big hurdles overcome, really does pay off in the long run. Because I think if you're so lost in just the output of like productivity, which is something Cory and I do a lot, is like just putting out a lot of stuff. If you don't pause for a minute to like kind of reflect on your success, then you won't be able to carry that over when you're like in the thick of it, and full of doubt and full of all sorts of naysayers and other things that pop up. We're both real big subscribers to the idea of the art of war, right? So like resistance will come as you're trying to make stuff, as you're trying to kind of do positive things. And to fight that resistance, you need to be able to pull on that past battle experience. But if you never reflected on the battles you've won, then like you're not going to have anything to look back at to get you through the next one.
This
So
is something this is something that also came up this week, but with a different twist. It is super important to understand that I'm not talking about positive and negative outlooks. I'm not talking about the cynic versus the optimist or the pessimist,
Yeah.
because the extreme optimist and the extreme pessimist are both equally problematic for different reasons and will both cause you to not persevere. It was
Well,
really interesting because they said that the extreme optimist has no grip on reality, and when real struggle happens, they don't process it. They whitewash it. And so the extreme cynic or the extreme pessimist, while they might have a better grip on reality, they hate the thing that they criticize. And so
yeah.
they don't love it and they don't enjoy it. In the middle is actually where, there's a huge range where you can be cynical and you can be optimistic as long as you don't make it to the outer extremes. Neither of those outlooks actually positively or negatively impacts whether you have perseverance and output or not. And so there's room for all types of personalities in this. It's not just the people that are willing to say, if you believe it, you can achieve it, or whatever. It's not like the self-help kind of fluffy guru type stuff. It's literally like whatever your personality is, you can gain these traits if you want to rewire how you think about frustration and resistance.
100%. And this all rings true as well because like one thing I've learned in especially as an art director is like you have to put up like you have to put out fires all the time. And I call them fires, but I'm not talking about like massive work problems. I'm just saying like every once in a while there's a production error or there's a rush job from a client that's incredibly pending and yet it's conflicting with five other rushes that you have to get done in the day. um, and like one thing I learned very quickly, and once again this was through experience, and through having a couple wins, was realizing that fires in business are opportunities a
Yeah.
lot of the time. And so if you can like view when you hit like a giant brick wall when you're in business or when you're doing art, when you're working on something, if you can view like those hardships and those struggles as like huge opportunities, it gives you the toolkit to kind of weather the storm. And then what's weird is this isn't a positivity thing, it's just a fact thing. 9 times out of 10 those things become opportunities because you objectively step back, look at the situation, and find the opportunity in it. And what's interesting is there is opportunity in a lot of situations that most people give up, bail, shrink away from. And so, like once again, I think what Corey's talking about and some of these things that this guest speaker was touching on are like really important toolkits if you want to last in art, because art is a long haul game full of ups and downs, and it's full of some really big downs and some really harsh struggles and some harsh realities and people who are not going to love everything you draw. And so, if you're not equipped to kind of like weather the long haul kind of slog of doing it, um, and you don't open yourself up to toolkits or rewiring of thinking, you're really setting yourself up for failure, you know. Um, but tying into what Corey was saying, why we're talking about this is because we believe in our community, so we think you guys can get there. If you're not already there, I think there's a lot of people in the chats who already have those skills honed and are like fighting that battle every day. So,
Yeah, and I
um,
and I want to say this along those lines because I think that is a really good point. I, Josh is not saying that we believe you can do it to be nice or to blow smoke. Like I have been teaching now for over 5 years at the college level, and I do not teach in the art department. I teach in
yeah,
the communications department. I take PR majors and video majors and journalists, and I teach them how to illustrate and I teach them how to design. And the fascinating thing about it is I have proven with, I don't know if I'm teaching So I'd say 600 to 800 students so far through this class. I'd say my success rate of massive watershed amounts of improvement from knowing almost nothing to getting really proficient in very difficult software, plus having starting that down that path of having an eye for design, is 80-85%.
Yeah.
And so I can say without any doubt that I know that this works, and I know that you can do it because I think anyone can do it. And here's the thing that's really interesting. Josh and I did not build the 48-hour art check as on the back of neurological studies. We didn't build this. We just thought, sometimes it helps to just say what was hard, and sometimes you should focus on, like, what you've achieved so that you know that it's possible, and planning is good. That's about as much thought as comes into it, but it has been proven to me time and time and time again that this format is really powerful. And I want you to think about this for a minute. At no point in time do either of us whitewash things and say everything is great. I've got my
Yeah.
rose-colored glasses on and everything's wonderful, and I'm an illustrator, and so that's what I do, right? And I also, at no point in time do we sit here and go, I don't know, man, it got hard, and so I played video games for 3 weeks instead of doing anything, right?
Yeah.
There's this middle ground of recognizing both the things that were hard and how we overcame those things and what we produced. And there's some really interesting comments going on in the chat that I wanted to point out. So Mike is saying that if you're an artist, hang your best work. Writers hang up a nice compliment that you got on a story that you wrote or an award that you won. And then being able to look at those things reminds you that you can do it, which I agree. Being able to focus on the things that you have achieved in the past, that's the domino that's going to hit the next domino. Okay. And then Carissa says, that Stephen King used to hang up rejection letters that he had as proof of the effort that he was going in the right direction because he had failed, because he had been rejected. So here's two interesting comments that seem to be at odds with each other, but actually both are very, very valuable. Being able to look at your failures as iterations and stepping stones towards success, and recognizing that that sucked, it hurt my feelings, I cried, it was hard. And look, I've also achieved some things. Those two things in combination, plus purpose, direction, and why, right? What we've been talking about, or here's what I'm going to do about that in the next 48 hours. This combination of things is literally scientifically proven and research driven from a neurological and a sociological standpoint, proven to give you the literal attributes that you need as a personality traits to be able to be successful in whatever you choose to be successful in. If you gauge success as improvement in your skills and abilities, your knowledge, your learning, your ability to learn, your ability to grow your skills, then being able to turn this switch on by knocking over that first domino, recognizing that it was difficult, seeing that you were successful in spite of the difficulty, and knowing that you can do this in the future again, is going to put you on a path that you can achieve huge things. Whether you're a pessimist or an optimist, huge things. And it's really cool to think that this has been proven time and time again, and you can read it from any angle. There's so much work out there right now that is proving that we are not fixed. Our personality traits are not inborn and ingrained to the point where we can't add to them and expand on them. And it's just super exciting. It's also fascinating to me that I think you and I have kind of stumbled on this formula that tends to work really well and continues to be backed up by the research.
Yeah, that's really interesting to connect it to the art check, because thinking about it, I mean, like, that is kind of the map. And I think it's because when we were talking about this, like, and this is when we were early on, when we were just chatting about it as an idea, we were trying to think of like the three core things that an artist needs to work on a and sustain a really long-term project. And one of the main things is just like, number one, just being able to communicate it, like, right? So you need need people, you need advocates, you need people who are actually going to listen and kind of be along with you on the journey. So that's one thing. The second is like to kind of be able to document it, like to be able to encourage your successes. So like that's really interesting how that ties in. The struggles part is because like it's a hard road and you need people to lift you up when you're struggling, and 9 times out of 10 that's how this has functioned for me, like for the year we've been doing it, where it's like I'll have a rough week, but then when I talk to Cory, who's also having a rough week because we're like weird and we have our emotions synced all the time,
Right.
but it's like but it is a weird thing where like just by having a commonality in that struggle and then also having somebody objective to kind of be able to be like, well, you're on the path, and then third, like to being able to commit to the next step to get you along your goal, and then also have accountability, which I think is the little thing we sneak in there that maybe wasn't touched on with this, but I think the accountability factor really keeps you on the path to wherever you're heading. And so that's kind of cool too. I didn't even, it's funny as we were talking about it, and you tied it into the art check. That's pretty brilliant because I do think that's why it's successful. I think that's why we keep doing it, because it yields results, and like the results that it yields, at least has yielded for me, and I think for Cory as well, has been like insane things, like being able to knock out a website design that would take most people months and took me a week and a half, and Cory knocked out an animation that would take most people like 3 or 4 months, and he knocked it out in like I think less than a week, which is insane. um, well, it was about a week,
Yeah.
but that's still a mass, like a very condensed thing for a single human being, not a team, like an individual, to accomplish. And it's kind of neat. I do think that art check kind of carries it along, and it also builds that repetition. So like that's the huge thing too, is like building those positive habits of constantly carving away at your goals. Because like I said at the top too, like um a lot of people will look at unattainable things like a graphic novel. Like I still meet guys who are like way up there and work for like Disney and have directed Disney films and stuff. And they're like, I've thought about doing a graphic novel, but that seems impossible. And I'm like, but you made an animated movie.
Right.
Like there's nothing more impossible than what you've achieved at a workplace. Why couldn't you? But I think the real answer is like, well, they could, but it's like that would mean going home and then working on their graphic novel. And novelists I meet all the time, where like I've met a lot of journalists, like people who've done journalism, for a long time and have this pipe dream of doing a comic or a book. And it's not a pipe dream, but it's a pipe dream for them because it's something that when they're done doing the paid work, they aren't doing the self work. And it's amazing how when you just get little chunks of it done, you end up actually with that thing. And then the second you have that happen once and you unlock it and you've finished like one big thing that's that big, deathbed thing that people are like, I wish I had written the great American novel or whatever. Once you've written your book and you press period at the end of the last sentence, um, it suddenly isn't so impossible to do because you did it.
Right.
And part of that, the thing is, these things don't make themselves. This work doesn't make itself. Like the art check's not going to make itself. So if you guys are like out there and you're like, I should do an art check, do one.
Yeah.
Like the time is never going to come where it's like completely convenient to do, because that's not how life works. Like your car is going to break down, or like you're going to run low on money and need to get groceries the next week, or you're going to have a job and the job's going to drop. Like there's a million crises in life, and if you wait for like a perfect clear runway, that's, I think the only clear runway is pretty much on your deathbed.
Well, and if you
And
have a clear runway, you're probably doing the wrong thing.
yeah,
Because
that's a
I've
fair.
got a clear runway to lots of things. I've got a clear runway to doing nothing but watching TV. I've got a clear runway to just like eating garbage all the time. I've got a clear runway to playing video games constantly. I like doing all of those things, but I don't have resistance doing those things.
Yeah,
I have resistance doing things that are worth it, doing things that are hard because they're
yeah,
valuable.
I love it.
So yeah. So this is great. This is wonderful. We went a little longer than we normally go, but the chat was phenomenal. I wish I could have gotten to all of the comments, but you guys rock, and thanks for sticking around. And if you want to check out the stuff that we're working on, if you're curious on what it is that we are actually talking about, and you want to see if we're putting our money where our mouth is, go check out CoryKerr.com. You can see some of the stuff that I've made. And if you want to check out Josh's stuff, a brand new site. Is it Quarterly Stories, or do I need to change that to joshuakemble.com?
Quarterlystories.com will take you to Quarterly Stories on joshuakemble.com. So
Gotcha.
that's fine.
So if you want to see, and I will say this is something that I am in awe. Awe, I think, is the correct word that I'm going for. Is I look at Josh's site, who is younger than I am, and I like to point that out now that I realize that, because I look at what he's produced in his life, and I think he's got to be at least 40 years older than I am.
Months ago.
Yeah, months ago. But anyway, I'm weeks older than Josh. He has achieved, just through consistent effort, an incredible body of work. Go look at joshuakemble.com. Just look at all of the comics. Look at all of the editorial illustrations. Look at all of the stuff that he's made. And it's not that Josh is magic or that Josh is somehow superhuman. It's that Josh is just, he's got a couple decades on me as far as the type of work that he's been doing, but with that consistent effort. And so for me, one of the things that helps me is to look at somebody like Josh and say, the only difference between the body of work that Josh has and the body of work that I have is time and focused effort. And so I can get there. And it's fascinating but it's an impressive body of work. And so Josh knows of which he speaks. So go check out joshuakemble.com. And you can always check out this podcast, the audio version of this show, as I choke on my dry mouth because I forgot to drink water. Carissa says, but what if Josh is a wizard? You can go to corykerr.com/48hr, and you can get the podcast audio version of this. And as always, make sure to hit that thumbs up because it helps the algorithm. Share this video, comment, and you guys are awesome. Go do an art check. Go be awesome. Knock over that first domino. Reflect on it later. You guys rock, and we'll see you guys in a couple days.
Bye, guys.